Amazon Studios is back with The Rings of Power Season 2, which premiered on August 29. So far, we've only gotten 3 episodes that tell us what direction the rest of the season might take. Right off the bat, one can tell that this new season feels far more cohesive than the first one. Still, the showmakers took their fair share of creative liberties with the plot, with added characters seemingly made up or loosely inspired by Tolkien's existing ones. In this marvelous video, let's explore the ways the show differs from the timeline in the books, and whether this works or not. Oh, and spoilers for those who haven't watched the episode yet.
Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin.
Season 2, Episode 1, Elven Kings Under the Sky. As we know, The Rings of Power is mainly based on the Silmarillion and the Lord of the Rings appendices, both which narrated everything that went down in the First and Second Age of Middle-earth. Tolkien often described the Second Age as a dark one, with the ascension of another, crueler Dark Lord. Sauron's failed ascension. The episode began in Fodorwaith, a region which Sauron continually assaulted during his reign of terror. This scene was portrayed as the dawn of the Second Age, with Sauron, in one of his fair forms, was about to be crowned as the new Dark Lord, after Morgoth's humiliating defeat as the War of the Wrath ended. Even though the idea of Sauron being crowned by someone else is laughable, this moment added to Adar's story. The crowning ceremony took a turn when Adar used Morgoth's silver crown, which once held a gleaming Silmaril, to stab Sauron just before the rest of the orcs jumped in and cut him down. Thus, Sauron's physical shell was destroyed, and when his corpse was prodded, an explosion of light blanketed all of Fodorwaith in ice and snow. This, of course, was a reference to how Season 1 opened with Galadriel and her search party. As was characteristic to Sauron, his spirit barely managed to escape in the form of goo that looked like congealed orc blood. He then devoured a poor traveler and took the form of Albrand. Meanwhile, the timeline of the books was spread out over centuries. Near the end of the Silmarillion and events described in the fall of Númenor, Sauron was said to have been in hiding for nearly 500 years after Morgoth was thrown into the timeless void. Not only did he put up a ruse of regret, but fled the judgment of the Valar and doubled down on his plan to conquer Middle-earth. So, in the books, Sauron's ascension as the second Dark Lord was a slow burn, as Morgoth's most loyal servant was lost without his master and needed to gradually gather his strength. He first began with building the land of Mordor, afraid of the rising power of the Númenóreans, but we'll get to that in a minute.
Hail, Adar! Hail, Adar!
Adar, the Lord of Moria. In The Rings of Power, we've seen an interesting character named Adar play a prominent role in most episodes. Originally played by Joseph Maul in Season 1, Sam Hazeldine took over the role of Lord Father. In the show, we saw Adar establish himself as the Lord of Moria after posing as a major driving force for the corruption of the Southlanders. Sauron, as Halbrand, returned to Mordor and allowed himself to be captured by Adar's henchmen. Understandably, Halbrand had personal beef with the self-proclaimed Lord of Mordor, for one, trying to take over his place and brutally killing him with his master's silver crown. Honestly, Adar seemed like a nice addition as one of the characters, since he offers an interesting perspective on the race of orcs. We see them as sentient beings rather than only weapons of war. It's also fascinating to see how one of the Moriondor, spirits corrupted by Morgoth, came to be revered as Lord Father of all orcs. But of course, Adar is a made-up character in the show. The timeline somewhat diverges from Tolkien's writings. Sauron began to stir again 5 centuries after his master's defeat, and started by corrupting the already shadowed men in the east and the south. In the year 600 of the Second Age, the first Númenórean ships began appearing off the coast and quickly established themselves as a major power. This scared Sauron, who finally established the land of Mordor and began building his stronghold of Barad-dûr 400 years later. Forging of the 3 Elven Rings. Last we saw the fierce Galadriel was at the end of Season 1. She just discovered Halbrand's true identity as Sauron. With one bit of his deception revealed, Galadriel instructed the Master Smith Celebrimbor to never treat with Halbrand again. After the Deceiver left, the Elven Rings of Power were still forged. These were Nenya, the Adamant Ring of Water, Narya, the Red Ring of Fire, and Vilya, the Sapphire Ring of Air. In the first episode of Season 2, Galadriel was seen chasing Elrond, demanding for the 3 rings to be returned. The 2 friends rode to Lindon to their High King, as Elrond firmly believed that wielding these Rings of Power would surely mean the end of the elves. Galadriel was reprimanded by King Gil-galad for withholding the truth from her own kind. You see, the forests of Lindon hinted at the decay that afflicted the elves. The king agreed that the rings must be used to preserve themselves and slow the passage of time for the sake of the people of Middle-earth. But Elrond insisted on the destruction of the 3 rings, and then proceeded to do something that would make his mother proud. In the Silmarillion, the sons of Fëanor swore an irrevocable oath to hunt down and retrieve the Silmarils from anyone bound to them. In the year 500 of the First Age, Elrond's mother, Elwing, possessed one of the Silmaril in the havens of Sirion. Eregion after fleeing the second kinslaying, but rather than letting herself be captured in their rampage for the Silmarils, Elwing threw herself into the Great Sea before she was transformed into a white bird by the Valar King of the Sea, Ulmo. Similarly, in Episode 1, Elrond threw himself down one of Lindon's waterfalls in place of giving up the 3 Elven Rings of Power. Elrond sought refuge with Círdan, one of the oldest elves to exist in Middle-earth. Círdan's silver beard told us how ancient he truly was, with being present by the shores of Cuiviénen when the elves first awoke. Círdan offered to toss the rings in the great chasm in the sea created during the War of the Wrath in the First Age, but settled on reconsidering the rings as saving graces. Near the end of the first episode, the Elven Rings were wielded by Galadriel, Gil-galad, and Círdan, much to Elrond's fear, but the spirit of the elves seemed to have persevered for now. The glaring difference between the show and the books was when the rings were truly forged. Keep in mind that in the books, the 3 Elven Rings were forged last, after the 16 others were forged under Sauron's influence. The show chose to forge the Elven Rings before Sauron's fair form of Anatar even reached the Master Smith Celebrimbor, but we'll talk about Sauron and Celebrimbor's time together while discussing the second episode. Season 2, Episode 2, Where the Stars Are Strange. In this episode of Season 2, we got a look at the glorious dwarven kingdom of Khazad-dûm heading toward despair. Meanwhile, the stranger, who everyone theorized to be Gandalf, was being hunted by a mysterious dark wizard, while Galadriel's folly of trusting Halbrand continued to haunt her. Let's dive right in. No. The Dwarven Realms. The episode began with a disgraced Durin IV and his wife Disa in the shopping district, when a great rumble in the mountain extinguished the reflecting sunshafts. Tolkien described the Dwarven kingdom as illuminated by shining lamps of crystal that reflected off of each other, often to reach deeper levels. Closer to the surface, massive windows were carved into the mountainside to let sunlight in. The show also acknowledged the other Dwarven cultures apart from Durin's folk. Also, dwarves from Ered Lindon, aka the Blue Mountains, occupied the cities of Nogrod and Belagust, both of which were destroyed in the War of Wrath. In the Quenta Silmarillion, Khazad-dûm was described as the greatest of all the mansions of the dwarves, which later came to be known as Moria in its days of darkness. Many of the Ered Lindon dwarves migrated to Khazad-dûm after the destruction of their kingdoms. We also got a glimpse at another significant character introduced in Season 2. We're talking about Narvi, the dwarf, who was mentioned in the Fellowship of the Ring and Unfinished Tales by Tolkien. One of the most excellent dwarven craftsmen to live, Narvi was also recognized for his dear friendship with Celebrimbor in the neighboring realm of Eregion. Together, the 2 master smiths built the famous doors of Durin. Remember, speak friend and enter? But we're pretty sure Gandalf's already forgotten. Jokes aside, the dwarven culture was uniquely interpreted with Princess Disa singing to the mountains. Tolkien often described how the mountains and mining were akin to religion for the dwarves. Disa's plea to free the trapped miners in Season 1 and the melody of reckoning sung into the mountain were hauntingly melancholic. The strange magic of the dwarves is often overlooked, but we also usually forget that the dwarves were brought into existence by the smith of the Valar, Aule. It was prophesied that after the Dagor Dagarath, or Battle of All Battles, Aule himself would aid the dwarves in reconstructing the world. The Dark Wizard. Since the first episode of Season 2, we've also gone along the stranger's journey into the east. Accompanied by Nori and Poppy, who posed as excellent navigators thanks to their half-foot blood, they arrived in the lands of Rhûn, where the stranger was seemingly being hunted by riders of the east, who bore the symbol of an eye. It's believed that the eye was a symbol of Sauron for the Easterlings since his transformation into a great serpent in the First Age. The mystical witches seen in the first season led us to a sandstone temple that housed a man who looked eerily similar to Saruman the White. However, many believe that this can't be the case, just as the stranger can't be Gandalf, since the Grey Wizard never visited the East in all of Tolkien's writings. So, the mysterious wizard in the hunt of the Istari stranger could be one of the Blue Wizards who had been sent initially to the East. In earlier writings, Tolkien suggested that the Blue Wizards essentially failed in their mission to protect the Easterlings from Sauron's influence. Instead, they turned evil and became founders of secret cults and magic tradition. In the Unfinished Tales, the 2 Blue Wizards were recognized as Alatar and Palandor were Maiar, who accompanied the Valar, Orome. But in later writings, they were named Morinatar and Romestamo, but we'll have to wait and find out who the Dark Wizard truly turns out to be. Galadriel's Ring of Adamant. In the second episode, Galadriel still seems to be reeling from Halbrand's betrayal. The messengers who were sent from Lindon to Eregion failed to deliver the warning about Halbrand's true identity. Amidst Galadriel's strategizing with King Gil-galad, a closer look at the map nods to the tale of Elrond's father, Eärendil. He was the half-elven mariner who had his ship blessed by the Valar and sailed with them to overthrow Morgoth's tyranny in the War of Wrath. It was said that he stood by the prow of his ship with the Silmaril, which Elwing escaped with, bound to his brow. Coming back to the show, Galadriel confided to the king her ring was enhancing her innate gift of foresight and giving her strange visions. One of these was Celebrimbor, who, as a result of seed sown by her, was killed as he recited the first few lines of the ring verse in black speech. In Tolkien's writings, the Ring of Adamant Nenya gave its wearer the powers of preservation, protection, and concealment of evil, a power which was used by Lady Galadriel to conceal Lothlorien from the eye of Sauron. Albrand in Oran. Albrand managed to convince Adar to let him go to Oran. This episode incredibly portrayed the deceiver bit of Sauron's title. He cleverly manipulated his way to Oran and tugged at Celebrimbor's heartstrings by subtly showing him the slashes that adorned his back. With Linden's messengers taken care of, Albrand could twist Galadriel's words and convince the Master Smith to work with him. Celebrimbor was promised reverence, and he seemingly got it with the forging of the 3 Elven Rings. But in a sinister moment, Albrand confessed that he wasn't truly human. We then get our first look at Sauron's well-known fair form as Anatar, the Lord of the Gifts. We can't help but feel bad for Celebrimbor, with the look of fear mixed with fascination on his face. In his chase for glory and making a name for himself as a Master Smith, it ended up with disastrous consequences. The episode neared its end with Anatar pretending to be an emissary sent by the Valar and Celebrimbor working together once again to forge rings of power for the Dwarven Lords, which included Durin the Elder. In Tolkien's writings, Celebrimbor and the Gwathi Miradyne worked under Anatar's guidance for nearly 200 years till they became unrivaled masters of their craft. This was followed by Anatar overseeing the forging of the 16 Rings of Power. Season 2, Episode 3, The Eagle and the Scepter. The last episode, released in the first installment of Season 2, reminded us that a young Isildur was indeed a lie. Queen Regent Midiel's coronation went as wrong as one could imagine, and the Rings of Power for the dwarves were finally forged. Isildur in Pelar. Isildur's father nearly believed his son was killed in the eruption of Orodruin, but in reality, the young Númenórean barely survived. But we need Isildur alive, for his story shaped the history of Middle-earth. He ended up in a region that would be named the Pass of Cirith Ungol in the years to come. Cirith Ungol translates into Cleft of the Spiders, and as the name suggests, was what a lost Isildur first encountered. Many theorized that the giant spider he battled was Shelob, but the size didn't match up. It can be considered an ode to Sauron's legendary pet in the Third Age. What's more significant was Isildur passing through the port town of Pelargir. In this episode, we saw the remaining survivors of the Southlanders flee to Pelargir in search of a safe haven. The era approaching the tragic downfall of Númenor also saw a vast number of the faithful, aka those who opposed Sauron and Melkor's worship, flee to Pelargir. With the eventual fall of their kingdom, Elendil and Isildur led their exiled people and established the realms of Arnor and Gondor, just south of Pelargir. We're curious to see how the show ties in Isildur's winding history with Pelargir in the plot ahead. Queen Miriel's coronation. The episode depicted the funeral of Tar Palantir, the king of Númenor and the father of Queen Regent Miriel. The people of Númenor seemed unhappy with their to-be queen, as they believed the Númenóreans were led to their deaths in the Southlands. Here we get our first sneak peek into Ar-Pharazôn's conniving mind with his eyes on the throne of Númenor. In Tolkien's writings, Tar Miriel was never referred to as Queen Regent, mainly because she never came close to becoming the Queen of Númenor. It was told that Ar-Pharazôn, who was King Tar Palantir's nephew, forced Miriel, his cousin, to marry him. This disgraceful act even went against Númenor's laws of marriage, so Pharazôn's desperate move toward the throne could be considered a coup of power. However, Episode 3 depicted a green-eyed Pharazôn watching Queen Regent get ready for her coronation. During the ceremony itself, the unrest grew until Elendil's daughter revealed the Queen Regent's use of the Palantir. The Seeing Stones were said to be made by Feanor and brought to Númenor to reassure the faithful. Miriel's ascension was instantly protested against just as a great eagle of Manwë swooped in. Pharazôn had hinted at how an eagle's arrival would be seen as an auspicious omen, but at this moment it was quite the opposite, as the people of Númenor believed that the eagle favored Pharazôn as their new king. In Tolkien's writings, the great eagles were messengers of the king of the Valar, Manwë. The sentient winged beasts had previously been guardians of Númenor, but symbolized a warning later on. This refers to Ar-Pharazôn's foolish conquest of the Undying Lands. On their sailing journey there, the Númenóreans witnessed the clouds take the shape of great eagles, which was meant to be interpreted as a warning to turn back before the one creator washed them away. So the show putting Pharazôn in front of a great eagle could be a foreshadowing of what's in store for Númenor and its people. We only hope that Elendil's noble blood isn't downplayed too much, as it makes for a crucial part of the story ahead. Back to Durin IV. Tragically, Adar seemed to succeed in subtly poisoning Celebrimbor against his own High King, Gil-galad. The Mastersmith even went as far as to lie and say that his forge was closed down so he could work in peace without the king's interference. In their meeting with Durin IV and Disa, Adar appealed to Durin's sentiment and the feud he had ongoing with his father, the king. Even so, the Crown Prince remained suspicious of Adar and his apparent benevolence. On the other hand, Disa insisted that the rings to be forged for them must be tried out as a desperate attempt to save Khazad-dûm from plunging into shadow forever. So, near the end of the episode, the Dwarven Rings of Power were crafted with Sauron's unmistakable touch. In the fall of Numenor, Adar managed to distribute the remaining Rings of Power among the dwarves, men, and one Easterling king. Despite their greed at times, the Dwarven lords seemed resistant to the temptation of the rings. Marvel's verdicts, that's all we have so far. Episode 3 also depicted a few exciting moments, like the existence of elves. The show takes place in an era when the Entwives were still alive before they were burned down by Sauron in the Third Age. So, a few words of wisdom from the tree hosts in the face of a growing shadow might be appreciated all around. But as Círdan suggested, is it truly possible to separate the Maker from his creation and use the Rings of Power for the greater good? We must wait and watch the direction the show takes with Tolkien's rings.
And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.